What's up, guys? Got a pretty short card today, kind of. I'm being very selective with mine today, off of maybe not being selective enough yesterday and going 3-4, which is not good. Could have been even worse, though. Hockey keeps saving my ass, really. The college bowl game, that was just awful. It's very difficult to gauge motivation in some of these games. I thought that the fired coach aspect of it, firing Babers, would put Syracuse over the top, and that was not the case. They were turning it over on every possession early in the game. That just put the game completely out of it already. Just way too many turnovers early in the game. That sucked. Syracuse did have a lot of transfers out, but USF also did, and Syracuse played the much tougher schedule. They were the better team. And the market read was pointing me towards Syracuse as well, so that was just unfortunate. That did not work out. I know there were some professionals that I follow on Syracuse as well. NBA was 1-1. The Washington Wizards got there, but they almost blew it. They were winning by double digits in the fourth quarter, I'm pretty sure, and then blew the entire lead. And it looked like they might actually lose the game, but they wound up winning by 1. There was a pretty decent chance they were going to wind up covering and not winning the game outright as well, which I wanted that money line the way things were going yesterday, and they did get there, thankfully. And the other NBA game, the Spurs, they looked pretty decent early on, and they just completely faded. The Spurs, they're just awful, though. So are the Washington Wizards, but come on, man. Oh, God. And then, basketball, that didn't get there either with Louisville. That was looking like that got to a point where they're kind of just hanging around the number, and then they just didn't have enough to get it done. They looked decent early on in that one as well, but of course, when you're a huge underdog, you just haven't played enough of the game to be losing by that much yet. So not good. Hockey has been my saving grace. Hockey has been pretty hot. I guess I should have laid off Montreal, but it wound up being the right play anyway. If you look at how that game played out, Montreal was a big underdog, and they were in that game the whole time. Even though they were down 2-0 early, they tied it, and then the rest of the game, they're right there in it. They tied the game. I think they retied it at the end, sent it into overtime, and it went to a shootout. When you have a big underdog like that, that's right there in that game, that's they have the game tied, and they go to a shootout, that means there was value on that big underdog. They were being undervalued with that line. So I was hoping they would get there and give me the hockey sweep. And if they did, I actually would have had a winning day last night, night last night, as bad as it was. Montreal could have done it for me, but they didn't. The other two hockey plays were good. The Blues, as a huge and even bigger underdog than Montreal, they just won outright pretty easily. It was a bad spot for Florida. And then I don't even remember Pittsburgh. Pittsburgh Penguins keep doing it for me. That was a close game, but they were able to get there as well. So let's take a look at the card today. I'm being, like I said, very selective. I only have one play right now. We can look at this. First, we'll look at the Gasparilla Bowl, which is the bowl named for a pirate, I guess, in Tampa. This is I don't even know what's the sponsorship on the Gasparilla Bowl this time. I have no idea. But this is UCF and Georgia Tech. This is a hard one to handicap. I'm not going to be on this one, but yeah, I'm looking at the sponsorship right now just because I like to make fun. This is the Union Home Mortgage Gasparilla Bowl. Used to be, it was Beef O'Brady's for a little while. That might have been back when it was the St. Petersburg Bowl, which I think was kind of the same bowl, but they wound up moving it across the bay, I guess, from St. Petersburg to Tampa. This is in Tampa now. And it was the Bad Boy Mowers Gasparilla Bowl for a little while, but now Bad Boy Mowers is sponsoring the Pinstripe Bowl at Yankee Stadium. I don't know, man. This is UCF and Georgia Tech, so UCF is playing fairly close to home here, Central Florida, obviously. They are only a couple hours away from where this game is taking place. So then the question comes in, are they going to be motivated to play in this game? And I think yes. I do think they will. UCF is a team. This is their first game in the Big 12 conference, so I don't know what we expected out of them this year. They jumped up in class and faced a much tougher schedule, and they were sitting at 3-6, or no, 3-5 maybe during the middle of the season this year. So they had to win. They won 3 out of the last 4 games to even become bowl eligible, including really destroying Oklahoma State, which was a game I was actually on because Oklahoma State was off of the huge rivalry win over Oklahoma. So it was a bad spot for Oklahoma State, but UCF totally destroyed them. UCF played really well down the stretch to get that bowl eligibility. In the game they lost, they almost won as well against Texas Tech. So they were able to, even though two of their wins were against Cincinnati and Houston, the other Big 12 newcomers there, they were able to beat both of them too and kind of be like, hey, we're the best of the Big 12 newcomers here, all right? So UCF, they were hot at the end to get bowl eligibility, and now they have it, and they're in this bowl. So that tells me they're kind of motivated to be here. Both of these teams do have a decent amount of opt-outs as well, though. So I think the opt-outs might be kind of a wash in this one. Georgia Tech has more, actually. I mean, they're the bigger school as well. I think they have more opt-outs than UCF, which is why UCF is favored by as much as they are here, even though Georgia Tech is the team I was going to say the bigger conference team, but not anymore because UCF is in the Big 12. But UCF, they're sitting at a 5.5 point favorite. It looks like it's down from 6 though, but it was sitting at 4.5 or 4.5 for like most of the last week and a half or so. So I don't know when it was 6. And so, but it does look like overall the market has gone down on Central Florida, but the more recent movement has gone up a little bit on them. But they also have 68% of the tickets, and it looks like the cash is evenly split 50-50. So the market read almost looks like it's leaning Georgia Tech. I don't even know which way I lean right now. Like I got to pick this game in bowls, and I'll probably be on UCF with the straight up picks in those pools at kind of a mid to low like confidence in my confidence pools. But as far as the spread pick that I have to make in the spread pool, I don't know which way I'm going to go on this game. UCF, they could be the more motivated team because they were hot to get into the bowls. Although Georgia Tech was they were sitting like right around 500 basically for the entire season. They were kind of just right around that, and they were sitting at 5-4, I think, and then had to win one more game. They won their second to last game, which was against Syracuse, actually. That's how they became bowl eligible. So Central Florida had a better late part of the season to really had to step it up to even get bowl eligibility because it looked like they were not even going to get into a bowl. So I think that tells me they're a little bit more motivated than Georgia Tech might be. However, if they take bowl history into account, maybe it's not the case because Georgia Tech actually has not been in a bowl for, I think, a few years, and they haven't won a bowl since like 2016 or 2017 or something. And the last bowl they were in was like a couple of years ago, and they lost that one, which I think was like a Quick Lane Bowl, the one in Detroit, something like that. So Georgia Tech has not won a bowl for quite a while. UCF, they were in a bowl last year, I believe, and they lost to Duke, I think, in the bowl that they were in last year, and they won a bowl the year before that, I think. So they've been in bowls every year recently. So if these guys on the team have been to a bowl, how much are they going to care about a bowl that isn't even taking them far away from home? So that's kind of the question there. I don't know. So I'm definitely not going to play this game. There are motivational questions on both sides, and there are kind of reasons for both teams to be a little bit motivated on both sides as well. So the whole game is kind of a wash. I just figured I'd comment on it, but I really don't know what else to say about that, really. Moving on to what sport do we want to go to next? Because I really don't have – I'll save college basketball for last because it's the biggest card, and that's the odds are that's where I have a play, and it indeed is. In the NHL, it's a really short card here, and I don't really have that much going on here. Don't have that much to say here. I can tell you that Philadelphia played yesterday, so they're in a back-to-back against Detroit. Edmonton played yesterday, and they're in a back-to-back against the New York Rangers. But the New York Rangers, they're coming off a pretty tough. They're in a pretty tough scheduling spot, I would say. They just won against the Bruins and the Maple Leafs. They won 3 games in a row. Those are 2 big wins on the road. They're coming back home, even though they have 2 days off. I think that puts them in a bad spot and kind of a letdown spot off of those 2 big wins. They might not care as much about Edmonton, who's a below 500 Western Conference team coming into their house here. In Edmonton, though, they're playing a 3rd game in 4 days, basically all in different cities, even though all kind of in the same area in New York, New Jersey. But that's not the best spot for either of them. So I can't get involved, even though my first look at this would say we got to go against the Rangers here, but then looking at the spot Edmonton is in, it's not good. So Rangers are down from minus 145 to minus 138 on the money line with 93% of the cash on them and 92% of the tickets. So I think what you can glean from that is that they are public and there is reverse line movement on them. So I think the market read is still on Edmonton in that one. And then I think if I was going to play anything in hockey, which I can't quite get there with it, I think the best play on the board would be to play the Chicago Blackhawks. They are down, though, from minus 115 to minus 113 as a favorite at home. When is Chicago favored? Not often, but Montreal's not that good a team. They got 92% of the cash and 90% of the tickets, so they are public, I guess. It seems like they're going to be the public team here, but it looks like they have maybe the cash discrepancy on them as well. It's kind of weird to see Chicago being public. I guess maybe it's that Bedard phenomenon, giving him the some of the public action, although it seems a little bit weird to me because the record is not good, and it's significantly worse than Montreal's too, really, even though Montreal does have a lot of overtime losses, so I guess it's not as there isn't that as much of a discrepancy as it looks like. But you would expect, I think, the public to kind of be on Montreal in this one, the way they've been playing recently. And this is why I think Montreal's not in a good spot, because they're in a pretty tough spot playing a back-to-back in two different cities. And even though they're kind of not going that far geographically, this is their third straight road game. They played on the 18th, beat the Jets in overtime, then had a couple days off, and then maybe I should have laid off last night's game just because they were off the big upset over the Jets, but it was still the right side in the game last night. They were in that game pretty much the whole way and took it totally to the wire there against Minnesota, and they wound up losing the game to Minnesota. I guess it was an overtime, not I said it was a shootout, but I guess it was an overtime. Apparently Minnesota scored a goal in the final 5 seconds of overtime, so that's great as well. Wait, is overtime 5 minutes or 10 minutes in hockey? So I don't even remember. They scored at the 4:55 mark in overtime, though. It's like, yeah, whatever. So that's just great. Montreal did take them totally to the wire, though, so I think they're still the right side in that game. But coming off that, like, really two big games in a row, a big upset win over Winnipeg, and then a really tough game last night in Minnesota that took them to overtime. And they got Carolina, Florida, Tampa, Dallas all up next. That makes this a really tough spot for them and a sandwich spot. But they do have a lot of time off after this game against Chicago, although maybe they're just still looking ahead to that, like, break. I don't know. So I definitely lean Chicago here, and I think it is the strongest play on the board in the NHL. I can't quite do it because Chicago is off of a couple of big games in a row as well. They've had 2 days off, but their previous two games, they played Vancouver to within one, and they beat Colorado by one after that. So that's a big win. They could be in a letdown spot after beating Colorado. That's a pretty big win. Although they're sitting there finishing up this homestand, and they are 1-1 on the homestand now because those other two games were the other two games of the homestand. So maybe that motivates them to show up here and play. And they've seen that Montreal's played pretty well in the last recently. Montreal has played pretty well, but I can't quite do it just because I think Chicago's in kind of a letdown spot after that big win over Colorado. Montreal is in the worst spot, though, I think, without a doubt. So I lean to Chicago there, but I can't quite do it. Moving over to the NBA, this is a tough card as well, man. Looking at, like, Golden State, like, you want to go against Golden State because they're in a bad spot, man. We saw what they did last. They beat the Boston Celtics in overtime and had an absolutely insane comeback against the Celtics to wind up beating the Celtics. That was back on Tuesday. They were down like 17 in the third quarter against Boston, something like that. Unfortunately, my Celtics, the Warriors, wound up putting together just an epic comeback in the late portions of that game, and it went into overtime. The Warriors won. They're obviously in a letdown spot after that, but they do have 2 days off. And, Washington played last night, and they're playing back-to-backs in different cities and playing a fourth straight road game since the 17th. So it's a fourth straight road game in like 6 days, I guess. So I don't like that. And it's also a fifth game in 8 days, all in different cities. So I just can't do it with Washington, man. Even though Golden State's in a letdown spot, Washington's in a really bad rest spot here. And I had them last night. They beat Portland. They caught Portland in a bad spot. They almost blew that game and had to continue that effort right to the wire in that game, even though it's against a bad Portland team. I just can't jump on Washington in the horrible rest spot that they're in here. So I can't do it. Golden State's in a letdown, but they're in the better rest spot out of the two. So no way that I can get there with it. I can't do it. And then and Golden State in that one is down from 13.5 to 12, although it looks like they have 99% of the cash and 87% of the tickets. I don't know about the cash discrepancy there, but it looks like the line is reverse line moving against the Public Warriors. So there is that, but I'm not going to be able to do it on that one. The game that I would be the closest to playing, although I don't think I can actually do it, is the Toronto Raptors. 76ers are up from 8 to 8.5. They got 78% of the tickets on them, but 52% of the cash is on the Toronto Raptors as the 8.5-point underdog. The 76ers are not really in the best spot here. They're coming off a win 2 days ago where they beat Minnesota after they had gone on a huge win streak, and then they lost a game to Chicago that was kind of in the mix there, which was they kind of a weird loss because it wasn't like a really horrible spot for the 76ers there, but somehow they lost to Chicago. And one thing about this is that most of these wins in this win streak have been against bad teams. They beat Washington twice, Detroit twice, Charlotte. The biggest win they had in that entire stretch was the last game against Minnesota, and the other win was against Atlanta, who hasn't really been playing that well. So this, even though they reeled off a huge win streak, it was not very impressive. And they lost to Chicago in the mix there. That's not a good-looking loss either. So I don't know. How good is Philadelphia since they've lost Harden? I think they're still good, and they were dealing with some injuries in a couple of those games. Or actually, they were dealing with the injuries before that, I guess, before they went on that win streak. I think Maxey was out for a couple games somewhere in the mix there. And Embiid, I think, might have missed a couple games in there too. But that was actually before the win streak. So I don't know, man. That win streak is not impressive. Maybe Philadelphia isn't as good as last year, and maybe their record looks a little bit better than they actually are. They're now coming in, and they're facing the Toronto Raptors, and they do have Miami up on Christmas Day. So I do think this makes it a sandwich. Will I play Toronto? I got to think about this. I think the one thing that was keeping me off it, because this is definitely a sandwich for the 76ers, so I would be on Toronto if Toronto was in a decent spot. The thing is, I think Toronto's not totally in the best spot here. I definitely lean Toronto. I'm close to making this a play, but Toronto, they also played 2 days ago, and they lost to Denver. And it was, if they had gotten blown out by Denver, I might be more likely to be on Toronto here. But they made a nice comeback after they were losing by a lot to Denver. They were down almost 20 to Denver, or they were down 20 in the game in the third quarter. And they put together a pretty good fourth quarter and didn't stop that effort. And they got back to within single digits in that game. So that's kind of what keeps me off of Toronto here, is that they put in a pretty big effort still to make that fairly close against Denver, even though Denver wound up covering the spread. The spread wasn't that big there. So that gives me a little bit of pause taking Toronto here. That's the only thing that gives me pause. I do think Philadelphia's in the hangover spot, and they're in the letdown spot, and I think they're possibly looking ahead to the Christmas slate there. So that yeah. I just can't quite do it with Toronto, man. I just can't do it. But because they're in that, they're coming off that tough game against Denver. But that is the way that I would lean in that one. And I was actually forgetting, this is the day that you have the Christmas look aheads here. So I don't know if there are other situations where you might want to look to go against the team here, because I don't know, man. Did I not look at all these games? Now you might see me make a play on the fly here. I think I did not look at Miami, Atlanta. I think I did not like the looks of these other situations here with some of these other games here. But I think that I ignored the Miami Atlanta game here. So I might actually wind up being on this game. And then you got the Dallas Mavericks are playing tonight, but they're actually playing tonight and playing another game before they play the Christmas game. It's just so insane, dude. some of these schedules, man. Like you're thinking some of these teams, most like a lot of the teams that are playing on Christmas play today and then they don't play again until Christmas. Like Phoenix is in a spot like that, but Phoenix I think is off of a bad loss. So Phoenix and Sacramento, they're playing each other, but I think they're both in spots where they might bounce back because they're both in spots where they just lost their last game. So I'm not going to jump in and get involved there. But let's look at this Miami thing because I think I completely overlooked this. Miami played a couple of tough games in a row there. They played Minnesota tough, only losing by 4. Then they went to Orlando, and they beat Orlando. The one other thing I was going to say about Toronto, by the way, is that one thing I think is another positive for Toronto, at least, is that after that Denver game, they're now going out on the road. So when you lose a game at home like that, it tends to be a good thing to get out of home and to go on the road for a game. It tends to just focus you on basketball, and you kind of like leave the home distraction stuff aside and you get to go out on the road and play. So I do lean to Toronto in that one. I just think that they put in a big enough effort against Denver that I don't think I can quite do it there. Miami, what did they do in the last game? They beat the Orlando Magic. That's a pretty big win for them because the Magic have been playing pretty well and maybe not as well recently, but Miami's right behind them in the division. So this is a division battle, man. And even though Atlanta is also in the division, Atlanta's kind of behind Miami by like 4 games or something. So Miami probably considers the Orlando game to be a little bit bigger because they're right there neck and neck for the division right now. Orlando was really hot to start the season. I was saying I think they're probably a bit overrated. Miami just was able to go in and beat Orlando. Now they come back out of that, come back home, and they face Atlanta here. And they got the Philadelphia 76ers up on Christmas and then Golden State. And Atlanta has not been playing well. They're below 500. But can I quite do it? I don't know, because Miami's in a bad spot. They have the Christmas look ahead as well. They're in a sandwich spot. But Atlanta just went into Houston and beat Houston, which is a pretty big win for Atlanta. But I don't. When you're Atlanta, I don't know. You're still probably going to be focused on and that might like help continue their momentum there. In Atlanta, that was a spot where they were way ahead and they blew the whole lead. And then they had to put it together again near the end. And they wound up being able to do it and winning the game there. But beating Houston, I don't know. Houston's kind of around a 500 team. So maybe we won't consider that to be like the biggest win there. I think I'm going to do it. I think I'm going to jump on the Atlanta Hawks here. I think the Heat are in a sandwich spot. The Heat look like they're up from 1 to 1.5, I guess, but 75% of the tickets on the Hawks. So I don't really necessarily want to be on a public team here, but 96% of the cash is on them. I think there is a cash discrepancy on the Hawks, and I don't see how the Hawks would wind up being the public team in this spot, really. I really don't, because, Miami obviously has the better record here. So, and they were the Eastern Conference Final representatives last year, and Atlanta is below 500, and they're just not looking good at all. So I don't see why people would want to be on the Heat really at all here. The line looks a little bit sus because it's like basically just saying pick the winner. The line looks like it's almost begging you to take the Heat here, to be honest. Like looking at, the Heat, they have the better record. So why is the line actually, do the Heat have injuries? Like, why is the line telling you that the Heat are actually like, the Hawks are actually the better team here? That's weird. Oh, it's because Jimmy Butler is out against Atlanta. So should I do it? Jimmy Butler is out for this game, so it might be the injured player theory spot for Miami. Shit. So that's why the line has gone down a bit. I think I'll just stay off. I think I just won't. I was so close to doing it too. I'll just stay off of it, and so I guess we're going to have no place here. Oh, man, I was really close to jumping in there on the Atlanta Hawks. If Butler was playing, we were getting Atlanta as another, because I was going to say, why is it indicating that Atlanta is like the better of the two teams there? I still lean to Atlanta in that one. Let's move to college basketball before I get out here. This video is taking longer than I expected it to, and I've kind of been all over the place. Sorry, I'm like totally schizo here, and I'm just, there's just too much for me to focus on, man. College basketball, what do I even want to talk about here? Because, there are certainly teams that are in bad spots, that are in kind of like letdownish spots, I would say. But most of the teams are are kind of in spots where I think that they are that they're just in like total mismatches here. I kind of lean against Nichols and towards Towson because Nichols is coming off a game where they played at Maryland and played really tough at Maryland, and they were winning a lot of that game, actually. That would have been a big win for them. That's a big game. You're playing a Big Ten team, and you only lose the game by 6. You almost beat them. Maryland actually undefeated at home. That was a big performance from Nichols. And Nichols, they wound up like barely losing that game as a 19.5-point underdog. That puts Nichols in a bad spot here against Towson. So that's one of the stronger plays on the board. I think would be Towson. They're up from 6.5 to 7. However, I look at KenPom, like, I don't know. I've been like kind of dodging KenPom a little bit in some of these spots. KenPom's got this game at 6. But the thing that keeps me off it, besides KenPom, saying that having this game at 6, so it keeps me a little bit away from it. Towson is definitely the better team, but Towson, they're coming off a loss that isn't that good against Bryant, but that game went into 2 overtimes, so I'm just going to lay off because I don't tend to like playing teams that are coming off like a really big effort game like that, and that was a game that was at least lined close. Excuse me, Bryant isn't really that bad. So that keeps me off of it a little bit, even though I think Nichols is in the worst spot there. They're in a pretty bad spot coming off that. And then what else we got going on here? I'm trying to look because I thought there were a couple other teams that I thought were kind of in spots that just aren't that good. Texas A&M, they're not in a good. Texas A&M, I guess this is the other one I'm going to mention. They played a couple tough games in a row. They lost to Memphis. Memphis is a pretty good team, and then lost to Houston in a game. They played Houston pretty close down the stretch. Houston was blowing them out of the building, really, and they were down more than 20 points in the second half, and they came all the way back and I believe tied it with a minute and a half left on a 3 or something. Texas A&M actually made a massive comeback and tied the game. Huge game for Texas A&M. The problem is I can't do this, man, because they're 32.5-point favorites up from 32 against Houston Christian. And KenPom, I think, has to sit around 32. So you look at this, it looks like it's a good spot to go against Texas A&M, man. They're in a hangover spot. And then it's like, but they're playing a team where they can really just dictate the score against this opponent. So I can't do it. I can't get there with it. I'm not going to be able to do it. I don't know if I should comment on any of these other games. Maybe there are some other spots that are spots that I could mention here, but I'll just get to the point. I'll get to the point and get out of here at this point, man. I am going to be on, and there's some like tournament games as well here. There's so many basketball games, man. What's the game I'm on? Even though the market looks like it's moving against me, I don't even care. Although actually, before I do this, I'll talk about the other side of the previous game that I'm fading here because what I'm going to be on, man, because I like to jump in against teams that pulled off gigantic upsets. But on the other side of that upset, I actually like playing on the team that got upset, which is UCLA. UCLA looked really bad in that game against Northridge and wound up losing the game. Everybody's like, what's wrong with UCLA? And I don't think UCLA is very good this year. They're like in a rebuilding mode this year. They're not very good. They might not make the tournament this year, man, even though we've seen them be like a high seeded team in the tournament the last couple of years. Those guys are gone from the team now. UCLA is not that good this year, but still they were 17.5-point favorite or something against Northridge, and Northridge is an in-state little brother there, and that was a big game for them. They went into UCLA and upset UCLA, and they had a big lead for a lot of that game. It was a max effort for Northridge, so you know where I'm going today with that one. But they were able to hold on for the outright win there, and that just looks bad for UCLA. And now people I don't think are going to want much to do with UCLA here against Maryland, a team that I just mentioned. Maryland coming into UCLA. Maryland has the better record. They've looked pretty good recently. The only issue I have with this is that Maryland is also off that game that was a little bit too close for comfort as a huge favorite, like I said. So Maryland beat Nichols, but they were a 19.5-point favorite, and they almost lost that game. So that gives me a little bit of pause in fading Maryland there, because I think Maryland will be focused, because I think they might have been looking ahead to this game against UCLA there, and I think they didn't take Nichols seriously, so that might cause them to focus here. So I think both of these teams are in spots where they're going to refocus, but Maryland has to go out all the way to the Pacific Coast, which I think is the first time they've been doing that this year. So that makes it a tough spot for Maryland, and it's a 9:00 p.m. game, so it's one of those East Coast teams going to the West Coast and having to play a late night game that really is like a game that's going to mess with your biological clock there. So I think it's a worse spot for Maryland, but they are both of those teams are in spots where they're going to probably tend to want to refocus there. UCLA, Ken Palm actually has them as a slightly better team over Maryland. I think I don't totally agree with that. I think Maryland might be the slightly better team than UCLA, but Ken Palm does have UCLA as a 4-point favorite. They're up to 3.5, so I do still lean UCLA there because Maryland's travel spot isn't good. And if Maryland wasn't in like a refocus spot like that, I might be jumping in on UCLA here because UCLA is off such a ridiculously stupid, bad loss. But Maryland having that bad performance in their last game against a bad team as well, that just keeps me off of it. That might have Maryland focused there enough to not make me want to play the game. You know what I'm on, though, because I was just talking about it. I'm going to fade Cal State Northridge today. Northridge coming off that massive upset, monster upset over UCLA. Max effort to the max in that game. I watched the end of that game, and Northridge had a huge lead for most of that game. The lead just kind of slid away, and they lost almost the entire lead, and I think it didn't quite get to the point where UCLA was able to tie it, but I think UCLA got to within like a couple of points, maybe even 1 point there, and Northridge was able to hang on and win at the end. And Northridge actually suffered a couple of injuries at the end of that game too, and I don't know how good those players are for Northridge, but I think one of those guys that got injured his leg. It didn't look great, and he might not be back for this game. I don't know. I think the other injury that they had near the end was less serious, but Northridge might be dealing with some injuries. I don't know about like the injured player theory situation here, but they're off a huge upset win, man. That's the entire handicap here, really. They're up from 4 to 5.5. So the market looks like it's against me. It's moving up to 5.5. I really don't know why. Ken Baum has Northridge as not a very good team here. It has Northridge as the slightly he's got Northridge slightly better than Montana State. And Northridge does have Cal Poly next, even though Cal Poly is not good at all. That is the start of conference play, at least for Cal State and Northridge over in the Big West there. So I don't know if they're going to overlook Montana State. They might, because Montana State's not a very good team either. They're coming off that big win over UCLA. They've won 3 games in a row, but it's not very impressive because they beat Bethesda, who is not a D1 team. Then they beat Utah Tech, who's not a very good team, and only beat them by 5. Nothing really to look at there. And then they upset UCLA, the monster win. Probably the biggest game of the year for them, really. That's the biggest team they're going to play this year. You play UCLA, a very named team in the Pac-12 there. Pull off that huge upset. Now you got Montana State coming into your house. It's like, I don't know. I don't know if you're going to pay any attention to that. And like I said, you might be looking ahead to conference play starting next. Cal Poly, and then you got Long Beach, which is a bigger conference game 2 days after that. So I think it's a spot where Northridge might overlook Montana State here. Montana State, they are coming off a dramatic win in their last game. That is true. On Tuesday, I believe. So I don't know, were both of these games on? Yeah, both of those games are on Tuesday. So both teams coming off kind of dramatic wins. But Montana State's was against Southern Utah, who is also not a very good team. So even though it required a buzzer beater to win, I don't know if you could say, well, maybe that was like a game where Montana State, like, they think they kind of got a little bit lucky there. I don't know. But Montana State, nobody's going to want them, man, because they haven't done anything impressive, really. They haven't played any big games, really. I mean, I think their biggest game was the game against Seattle early in the season, which they lost. So I don't think nobody's really going to be looking at this game. But people saw that Northridge upset UCLA. Northridge has the better record, but I think that the discrepancy between these two teams isn't as much, even though I think Montana State's not as good as they have been in the last couple of years. They've been like the best team in the Big Sky for a couple of years. I think some of those guys graduated and whatever. But even though they're coming off a buzzer beater winner, I think this is a much worse spot for Cal State. Northridge, Ken Palm, so the numbers guys kind of are saying that this line might be a little bit too high as well. I'm jumping in on it. I'm on Montana State. I actually got it at +6. So I think it's a good number there for that. Cal State, Northridge, it's the type of spot that I look at, man. I think it's just it is a prime letdown spot. And after all that, after going 35 minutes on this thing, we only have one play today, and I just gave it to you, and that's it. We'll have more. We have a full college basketball slate tomorrow, and probably 7 bowls. I don't know if I'm going to be on any of the bowls tomorrow, but we'll see. And then, tomorrow's going to be a much more jam-packed card because it's Saturday, so I'm going to have to get to work looking at that stuff as well. Have a good Friday, man. Have a good weekend. I keep doing the shocker. I don't want to do that. Peace out.